And we are live. It's the Revved Up 906 podcast, a Detroit Pistons podcast, to be exact. And I'm Hudson.
And I'm Ryan.
And before we get into episode number 31 of season 2, you guys know the deal. I got to talk to you guys about a few quick things. First off, if you are new to the channel, you don't know that we have partnered up with Grind Clothing Co. So I'm going to let y'all know. So make sure to click the link in our YouTube bio or in the description below to Grind Clothing Co.'s website, because they are our official merch sponsor. So make sure, if you like this podcast, to rep your favorite Detroit Pistons podcast, Revved Up 906. We have merch drops from season 1 still on that website, just some OG designs to this year's and this season's merch drop, Protect the Ball. So make sure to check out those merch drops and see what designs you like, what designs you don't like, and just let us know what you think. And then also, Grind Clothing Co. has a lot of different merch design options for everybody, different tastes and likes. So make sure to check their just OG and original merch drops that they make every month, and make sure to just check out their stuff. If you are new to the channel, make sure to like and subscribe. And then below this video, you're going to see an arrow button right below. Make sure to click that arrow button and share us on Snapchat, Facebook, Instagram, all of the above. Just so that Pistons fans, friends, and family could know about your favorite Pistons podcast, Revved Up 906. And as we go along through this episode, make sure to comment below. We'd love to know your thoughts, opinions, takes, hot takes, whatever it might be. Make sure to comment below as we are commenting on today's episode. Without further ado, let's get into episode number 31 of season 2. And we got a good one for you guys today. We are going to be breaking down the possible first and second pick of this year's 2024 NBA draft. And where we will be getting most of our info is from NBA.com. And the reason why this is a trustworthy website is because basically they scan the whole internet and look at commentators, sports writers' mock drafts, and they basically compile those statistics and those picks and put it all together in one mock draft. And so, kind of break that down, NBA.com put it, remember, the consensus mock draft is a compilation of the best mock drafts around the web. We bring them together to provide a solid estimate of how the draft could play out. Now, obviously, we know the first pick goes to the Atlanta Hawks. The next bullet point goes on to say, with the Atlanta Hawks making a surprise leap from the 10th slot to the number 1 overall pick, consensus has quickly emerged around French prospect Alexander Sarr. 9 of the 10 mock drafts we track have updated the following lottery results. And with the 2024 draft order official, Sarr sits in pole position across all 10 mock drafts. So we will talk about Sarr and the Atlanta Hawks, but I want to start off with talking about the Washington Wizards. It was not a huge surprise with the Wizards getting the 2nd overall pick. They were one of the worst teams in the last season, and they ended up with the 2nd pick. And a lot of people are talking about Zaccharie Risacher going 2nd, or Risacher, as some people say. Right now, he is a 6'8" international player, most commonly put at 2nd overall. He's a combo guard forward, looks the part, and has all the two-way ability to deliver on that potential. The floor is high, but so is the ceiling. The biggest question is, where will he reach? Will he be a superstar? Will he just be a role player? Time will tell. Ryan, what are some of your thoughts on Zach going to Washington? What are some of his statistics from the past? What are your thoughts?
So to me, he's an untapped potential kind of wing. He's 18 years old, still relatively young, still has a long way to go into being whoever he may be. The word on him is, if right now, as is, he's 2 years out from actually being like a very, very good player. So he still needs time to develop. But with Washington being number 2, obviously they need everything they can get. I don't know necessarily if the small forward position is what they need, because you have Denny Advia there at the wing already.
Right.
Then they have like Kyle Kuzma as an example. Obviously, you're going to want to bring in younger players, but they already have the wing pretty much covered. To me, this is a little bit of a surprise, but at the same time, like this draft is not widely known as one of the better drafts out there. It's one of the weaker draft classes, supposedly, for the last couple of years or so. But what he does is he has a decent size, he has a desirable physical profile that the NBA teams often look for. He's a big wing slash forward. He has a high release point in his shot, which is good for the NBA and just in general because it's a harder possibility of blocking his shot or really contesting him. He's a very efficient 3-point shooter. When given the opportunity, he can hit those shots in your face or even catch and shoot. He's a very solid player. Now, the one lacking thing in his game is he's not like a primary ball handler. He always looks for the primary ball handler to really make the offense go to him, rather. Like he'll sit in the corner waiting for his opportunity rather than creating opportunities for others. But he's still a very solid all-around player. This past year, played for JL Borg in the EuroLeague. He averaged 10 points, 4 rebounds, an assist, a steal, barely a block. Shot 44% from the field, 35% from 3, and then 74% at the line. So he's like, keep in mind, they play much fewer games over in Europe than they do in the NBA. He played 32 games this year, and he's playing less too because of the games and how many games there are and how big their rosters are. It really just breaks it down a little bit there. But overall, he had a solid season. Obviously, there's still a lot of room for development there. Still, he's definitely a prospect, not like an all-rounded player like a Dalton Connect, as we will talk about in the next episode or so. He hasn't gotten there yet, but when he does get there, I think he is going to be a solid all-around wing in the NBA.
Yeah, what's kind of interesting is when you talk about his play style, he's not necessarily an on-ball small forward. He's not going to find his own shot. He's going to wait for guys to set him up. And I do see that well working with guys like Jordan Poole and Kyle Kuzma, just because they're the kind of guys that have such the play style where they just find their own shot. And Jordan Poole can be a good passer at times when he's focused on that statistic. So I do see him working well with the Washington Wizards. But Ryan, when adding a scorer mind like Zaccharie has to the Washington Wizards, do you see that mixing well with guys that are so focused on scoring like Denny Advia and Jordan Poole and Kyle Kuzma? Do you see that mixing well?
To me, the Wizards are just a toss-up of different players. So they don't really have a set in stone, like, yeah, this is our guy. I think everybody on the team kind of assumes that it's Jordan Poole. I think Jordan Poole thinks it's him, but I also think Kyle Kuzma thinks it's also him. So the team dynamic, it's not there yet. They just appointed a new head coach. They promoted within. They promoted one of their assistant coaches, Brian Keefe. So who knows what he'll bring to the table, but they really liked him. He's an inside guy, and hopefully that'll help bring this team together. Because you have Tyus Jones, Jordan Poole, Denny Advia, Corey Kispert. You just drafted Bilal Coulibaly this past year, which is the same position. He's a wing, same size as Zaccharie Risacher. So like, pretty much identical players in what their abilities are. So it'd be interesting to see what happens there. But this team is it's lacking a true leader. And until that happens, obviously, who's to say what he has for an overall impact with this team? But I think just the mix of him and Poole and all those guys, I think it's just going to be one of the guys. He's going to contribute, maybe not give you 15 every single night, but maybe around 10 points, give or take, just depending on what Jordan Poole does this upcoming season, given the fact that it's his second year and with this team. What does Kyle Kuzma do? Does the Wizards move on from Kyle Kuzma? That's being talked about. So it's really there's the Washington Wizards' whole landscape of their franchise is just all up in the open. So it's really hard to say what his true identity will be with them this following season. But I think he's a good prospect. He just needs a couple of years to develop.
When talking about France and the draft prospects that come out of there in the Euro League, it's kind of interesting because there's a whole different pool of players. You know, you have like guys like Victor Wembanyama to Killian Hayes. When talking about France prospects, is a little worrisome knowing that some of the busts that have come out of France, or do you think it's not necessarily a developmental issue out of France? It's just a player by player basis. Do you think it's risky to get a guy like Zaccharie just because he's out of France?
I don't necessarily think so. I think it's just us as Pistons fans have had terrible luck as of
All right.
lately. And that all comes to Stan Van Gundy and then of course Troy Weaver. But I don't think Weaver really missed. I think if Killian got the confidence that he truly did have inside of himself, then he would have taken that jump. But without that confidence, he just was not great. But you go like Sekou Doumbouya, a couple years back, overall raw prospect, but Stan Van Gundy never utilized him in the right way. And so because of that lack of development, then there were the issues. Bilal Koulibaly out of France last year, he's still a developmental prospect, still really young. There's a reason why he was, I believe, in the later early lottery. There's a reason why he went there. He needs to develop still. Obviously, Victor Wembanyama is the clear cut, oh my goodness, generational talent. But I think it's per player basis. I think everybody is coming out at a different time because you have Alexander Sarr, who we're going to talk about here shortly. He's actually playing in the NBL. He's not playing in EuroLeague. He's playing in a separate league. And then you even have Victor Wembanyama, who played it. I believe he was EuroLeague himself. And then Bilal Koulibaly played with Victor Wembanyama on the same team. But like all these guys, like Killian Hayes was NBL. Like all these guys in France really don't. They just go all over the place. They play everywhere. So that's why I really think it's per player basis and not just if France has a hard time developing these prospects. I think just all these players are thrown in different situations. Alexander Sarr before playing in the NBL was in the overtime elite for 2 years. So like he came over, played, and then went back. And going back actually helped him develop his game. So I think it's really per player basis on whether or not these guys actually succeed at the next level. It's not necessarily France as an issue.
For me personally, I'd really like to see Zaccharie go to Washington just because they have a new guy at the helm. I believe his name is Brian Keith. Is that correct, Ryan?
Yep.
Yeah. So, I mean, you have a young, new coach that's hungry to get wins, to turn this organization around. And I think for a guy like Brian Keith, if you bring in Zaccharie Risacher, I think it could be a big move for that organization. When he's that big of a project, I think it's good to add a player like that to an organization that we know is a two-way player that has a good offensive ability, moves very fast for a 6'8" player, very long. And he just needs a little bit more smoothness added to his game, a little bit of refined play. And I think a guy like Brian Keith, who's so hungry to win, ready to turn this organization around and just bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, I think it might be a good time to add a project like Zaccharie to Washington.
Yeah, I don't think it's a mistake. I really think, I mean, having him go as high as 2, obviously there's a reason for that. I think the ceiling that he has is like he has like the from what I understand and from others and what they've said, the pro comp is Harrison Barnes and Michael Porter Jr. And
Okay.
if he can get to that level, I think he can easily get to that level. And that's no disrespect to those two players because Harrison Barnes, prime Harrison Barnes, was one of the better wings in the NBA by far.
Totally.
He's still very solid today. Michael Porter Jr., though, this past year in the playoffs was very lacking in his game. So I don't know what was going on there. But I personally think Risacher can actually get above these two players and overall abilities goes. Just because he can shoot, he can put the ball on the floor. When he's looking to facilitate, he can facilitate. He has a very high basketball
Mhm.
IQ. His defense is solid. Like you mentioned, he has quick feet. He has just, and he's a big wing. He's not just a normal rinky-dinky wing. He's very long, very tall, has that athletic ability that a lot of wings don't have right now that really could bring him to the next level. And then he has the high shot release on top of being very efficient from the field. Like he has all the intangibles right now to really be a very solid player. And that's what Washington is looking for. Obviously, you go as far as they move past JB Bickerstaff, they go with Brian Keefe. They're looking to change this course of rebuilding the Washington Wizards, even though they've sucked pretty much every single year, either sucked or been like late playoffs, but late playoffs meaning like one of the lower seeds getting in, eighth seed, seventh seed, and then get knocked out, swept in the first round. So they haven't been to the promised land, I guess you could say. But I think that's what they're looking for with him. Is he's an overall prospect, but out of any of the prospects in this draft, he's by far one of the clear-cut most promising ones.
So say for some reason Zaccharie falls to the fifth pick, and obviously everyone knows the Detroit Pistons landed with the fifth pick. Would that be the kind of guy you'd want the Pistons to pick up at 5?
See, that's tough for me. Just because I think for overall prospect standpoint, he is better than a Sarr Thompson. And overall, obviously shooting, he's drastically better. The only thing that Sarr has over him is a slight defensive edge. That I would give Sarr props for that. But they're pretty much the same size. And then we learned this past year, at least what I learned from watching Sarr play, is he's not a clear-cut starter. He's a good role player off the bench. That's what he is. I could be
Right.
wrong, and I want to be wrong, but that's what I see out of him. I don't see him being like, whoa, watch out for Sarr Thompson. You got a game plan for him every single night out there because he's going to
Yeah.
shock the world. He's going to be one of those guys that comes off the bench, makes a great defensive stance, or does something miraculous offensively, and he's floating like a butterfly and up through the air. But what I see out of Risacher, if he were to fall to the Pistons, which I think highly unlikely given the fact that he's projected second overall, what he could bring to us is shooting. We need shooters on this team. And his high efficient three-point shooting, and then even from the field and at the line, I think adding a high shot release, efficient shooting alongside Cade Cunningham, Jaden Ivey would be something desirable, really, because we traded Bojan, we traded Alec Burks, we land and bring in Simone Fontecchio, who's a solid three-point shooter. But outside of Simone, we don't really have anyone else. So I think adding Risacher in would add three-point shooting. And I think anytime you can add three-point shooting with a high-end prospect, you kind of have to go for it.
All right. So now let's talk about the projected number 1 overall pick, Alex Sarr, to the Atlanta Hawks. As we all know, the Atlanta Hawks had a 3% chance to get it, and they did. Here's the description on Alex Sarr. He played with the Perth Wildcats in Australia. His position is between forward or power forward to center. He's a 7-1 player that from international status. Most common chosen at 1, but for sure a top 10 pick. His description is an impact player on defense who's been growing into a larger role at the other end. Should offer immediate complementary help with the potential for more. Right now, the Atlanta Hawks roster from forwards to centers sits Saddiq Bey, Bogdan Bogdanovic, Clint Capella, Jalen Johnson, DeAndre Hunter. Pretty much the Atlanta Hawks are a very heavy forward team. Ryan, what are some of your first thoughts on Alex Sarr?
He is an impressive player. When you break down what he did stats-wise this past year, like, he doesn't look like he's anything spectacular. When you turn on the tape and actually watch him play, he's just flying all over the place. He's very long, as you mentioned, 7'1". There's not a lot of guys at that size that can move like he can. What he can do is obviously strong defensive skills. He excels at defending ball screens. He switches onto guards effectively. He does everything, every little thing that you'd want out of a guy in his size on defense. But then, like, he shooting the ball has a great mid-range shot, great fadeaway mid-range shot, and then even can catch it from beyond the arc and hit those threes too. What he is to me is like, so in pro comparisons, I like to bring those into the mix sometimes. But a
Totally.
lot of the scouts are saying that he's going to be like a Jaren Jackson Jr., which there's nothing wrong with Jaren Jackson Jr. I personally love him. I think he's one of the better big men in the NBA today.
Right.
But Paul George said on his podcast that, and I will take Paul George over any beat writer out there because he's actually an NBA player and he actually knows
Yep.
what he's talking about. And he
Yeah,
said
totally.
that Alex Sarr reminds himself of Giannis Antetokounmpo, which that's
Ooh.
high praise. If he
Yeah,
could get to that level, my goodness, because and actually these two guys kind of have similar stories and not obviously not the same history, but similar stories in the sense that they're both they're going to be developmental prospects. They come from a foreign country. They aren't really highly scouted up until the last second, and then boom, they take off. I think Alex Sarr is going to take off just at the same rate as Giannis, just a little bit faster, just because he's going to be a #1 overall pick. But if you can get a guy like Giannis out there with you, my goodness, that's pretty darn good. And obviously, the Atlanta Hawks big situation, they have a lot there. Onyeka
totally.
Okongwu, didn't mention, but he is their center. Clint Capella oftentimes plays the 4 with them. So they have the big men. And so it's kind of like, ooh, why would you draft Alex Sarr there? Because you don't necessarily need him. But if Paul George is saying he's the next Giannis, you kind of have to take that flyer. But then also, I think the Atlanta Hawks are actually missing a big. And that's no disrespect to Okongwu because he's a very solid big man in the NBA today. But you look at their team overall, you have Trae Young, DeJounte Murray, Sadiq Bey is no slouch. You have DeAndre Hunter, Okongwu, like I mentioned, Clint Capella. They have an overall solid roster, but they're lacking solid play out of the big man spot. And if you can add Sarr, who has a 3-point shot, can put the ball on the floor, hit a post fadeaway, just his defensive ability is just off the charts in general. And the fact that he's still very young and can hit a high level of basketball for years to come, it's kind of interesting to see what plays out with that. I think he's a guaranteed #1 pick at this point, so they can't not draft him. But I could see Atlanta possibly trading out of that spot for a hungrier team. There was speculation of the Pistons potentially getting the #1 pick in a trade where we'd send what was it, Jaden Ivey, Asar Thompson, and the 5th overall pick to the Hawks for the 1st overall pick, and I believe DeJounte Murray in that deal too. Which I think that's extremely lopsided because there's no way Atlanta would accept that trade because you'd be giving up potentially Giannis Antetokounmpo and Alex Sarr, and then DeJounte Murray, who you just traded for. I don't think they do that, but I found that interesting. So it's really, it comes down to me. Do they go and commit to getting Sarr or do they trade out? It's just, there's too many questions with these top 2 picks this year that who really knows?
Yeah, and I don't think it's totally out of the question for the Atlanta Hawks to draft Sarr just because we are seeing so many Eastern Conference teams going the too big route. We see in Cleveland, we see Jarrett Allen with, what's the center's name?
Evan Mobley.
Evan Mobley. And then we see in New York, Julius Randle and Mitchell Robinson. You know, we're seeing it a lot in the Eastern Conference. Of so many lineups going with 2 like nearly 7-footers. So I think if the Atlanta Hawks do kind of want to compete with teams like the Boston Celtics, the Knicks, the Cleveland Cavaliers, it may be necessary for them to go out and get an Alex Sarr to have a second big man in there that can really make an impact. Because we know on any given night, Oneke Okongwu could maybe not show up, or Clint Capella just get rebounds, and that's the only impact he makes. Those are the kind of centers they are. You just don't know what you're going to get from them on any given night. So it may be a big move for the Atlanta Hawks to get Alex Sarr and maybe get over that hump, just with the NBA going with those two stretch bigs in their lineups. It's turning into that being the type of lineups we're seeing in the NBA. What are some of your thoughts, Ryan?
Yeah, the big man situation right now is interesting because you look back even 2 years ago, it was really small ball basketball. That was it. But now we're
Yeah.
going back into the big man landscape. Like you have the
Yep.
Timberwolves just competed in the Western Conference Finals, lost to the Mavericks, of course, which is kind of sad because it was a small market team, but I still love the Mavs too. You have Karl Anthony Towns and Rudy Gobert, who are both 7-footers, and
Yeah.
they worked perfectly together. Like you had Cat throwing lobs to Rudy Gobert, two big men playing off each other in a pick and roll situation. That's not common. And then even like you mentioned with the Knicks and then the Cavs and even the Celtics, there's so many teams right now that I will say where are they? They're at the top of their divisions and their conferences, and they have two big men playing and they're starting five. So it's the landscape of basketball has changed drastically the last couple of years, going small ball to bigs. But I think having two bigs, like obviously, I think that's what we're missing outside of a solid wing, is we're missing another sidekick to Jalen Duren. I think that's what we're missing there. If we had a good solid big that can stretch the floor, because obviously Duren can't stretch the floor, but if we had a big that could stretch the floor, give Duren the space he needs in the paint, but then also be able to get down there when he needs to, or pop out for a catch and shoot three in the whole 9 yards, we'd be in a better position. And I think that would be a better position for the Atlanta Hawks to be in too, because Onyeka Okongwu can't step out from three and take that shot consistently. He'll hit it once or twice, but that's about it. And Clinton Capella doesn't have a 3-point shot either. So like outside of them, and then you have obviously the rest of the 4/5s that they have. They don't have a stretch four. They really only have fives, and that's it. And until you add that dynamic to that team, that would change the whole landscape, because now you're not relying on Trae Young or even DeJounte Murray to facilitate the entire time. You can have the Alex Sarr pop out for a three, run the pick and roll, do the whole 9 yards, and have success that way too. So I think the way the landscape of the NBA is going right now, you kind of have to have two bigs in order to have success. Of course, this finals matchup between the Celtics and the Mavs, you have the Celtics, who are potentially without Kristaps Porzingis, but who's to say? And then outside of Porzingis, they don't really have a true big man outside of him, outside of Al Horford. And then the Mavericks, you have Derek Lively and you have Maxi Kleber and all those guys too. So it'll be an interesting matchup because it's pretty much more of a small ball matchup than what we've seen in the past, especially this past season when you have Rudy Gobert, Karl Anthony Towns, Mitchell Robinson, and Julius Randle, and others. So I think the way the NBA is going, the Atlanta Hawks have to take Sarr with this pick to upgrade their big man group, but then also get a guy who can actually put the ball on the floor and take shots from deep.
So with Alex Sarr getting the comparison to Giannis Antetokounmpo, do you see him mixing well with the ball handling and the scoring load that Dejounte Murray, Trae Young, and Bogdanovich have? Because somebody has to control the offense. Do you see that mixing well? Because we know that Giannis is very ball dominant in the Bucks organization and how he really is the one controlling the offense. How do you see that dynamic working?
I see it as I think Sarr would be fine not facilitating the offense. I think he'd be fine with that completely. But what the Atlanta Hawks have shown us the last couple of years is that you can't win with Trae Young. And now everybody in the comments, don't start hating on me for that. It's just kind of true. Trae Young needs help. I'm not saying he's a bad player, but he needs help. Every good player needs help. DeJounte Murray, you thought that was going to help? It has helped, but they still need more help. they're lacking outside of guard. They're lacking, and so you add in a potential Giannis Antetokounmpo type player. I really think you could throw the ball in Sarr's hands the entire time, and then you have um, like Trae Young rolling off. You have DeJounte Murray rolling off, but I'm not saying they can't facilitate either. I just think if you had a three-headed monster with those three guys, it's hard. It's going to be hard to stop. It really is. So I see them gelling well together. Trae Young, solid dude. DeJounte Murray, solid dude. And Alex Sarr has a very positive attitude. Man, I just rhymed. But but I really do see them mixing well. I think Sarr is a very unselfish player. When he wants to be selfish, he can put on a show. When he chooses not to, he'll still have a very solid night at any given opportunity.
Make sure to comment below your thoughts on Alex Sarr mixing with the Atlanta Hawks. Ryan, any last thoughts when breaking down Alex Sarr and possibly going number one to the Atlanta Hawks?
Honestly, I don't think so. Just because I mean, I think I explained that pretty well, but
Yeah.
I don't know because he's just an interesting player. He's very long, very athletic. He, like I said, can put the ball on the floor, can shoot in the paint, can shoot outside. And I think as good of a comparison as Giannis Antetokounmpo is from Paul George, props to you, my sir. But I think he could even be better than Giannis, and that's bold, I know. But I think Alex Sarr could be better in the sense that he's a completely different player still too. I think we haven't seen a player like Alexander Sarr come out in a while. I think it's kind of like a KG mixed with a Giannis, mixed with uber athletic Jaren Jackson Jr. I think just what he can do is a little bit more than what Giannis can do, and it's a little bit more than what KG could do. It's a little bit more than what Jaren Jackson can do. He's one of those young players like Risacher, like we mentioned, who has a ton of raw potential that still needs to develop. But once you get there, my goodness, watch out because the Atlanta Hawks with him, I think they're a playoff team. Not a championship contending team, but an easily high end to low end playoff team right off the get go after you draft him on draft night because I think he is that good.
What's interesting about this draft is obviously like from the first pick to like the sixth pick, it's kind of a throw up. Obviously, the media right now is kind of pushing Alex Sarr, and I think that's for good reason. I think he's going to be a talented player. But if you look at like, okay, who's going to be the breakout player in this year's draft? Because there's going to be somebody when the season starts that's just going to go leaps and bounds over everybody else. And I think if you're a betting man, I think you put your money on an Alex Sarr just because I think the Atlanta Hawks are missing that one piece to be a very big part of that team. They've had so many years with Trae Young and mediocre play, 500 play, that I think a guy like Alex Sarr might come in and make a big boom in the NBA. So if you're a betting man, maybe put Alex Sarr at Rookie of the Year, maybe put $50 on that or something, because this draft is so interesting because there's so many throw ups. I mean, we're going to talk about who the Pistons may take with the fifth pick, but really it's like who knows what's going to happen. So it's going to be very interesting. Make sure to keep tuning in to Revved Up 906 as we break down the next couple picks of the NBA draft in future weeks. Make sure to like and subscribe, and that will do it for episode number 31. We will see you guys in the next episode. Peace.